Welcome back. I'm Michelangelo Signorelli on Sirius XM Progress 127. Leonie Haimson is the co-chair of the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy, founder and executive director of Class Size Matters, a nonprofit organization that advocates for smaller classes in public schools. And Cheri Kiesecker is a scientist and researcher for the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy. And together they wrote a piece in the Washington Post, which I was telling you about a little while ago, all about the amount of data that is collected about children. Last year, the extent to which information about students was being tracked, profiled, potentially shared, came to light when a $100 million student data collection project funded by the Gates Foundation and operated by a nonprofit organization called inBloom was forced to shut down because of the concerns. And the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy has been the leading advocate against the inBloom project. And Cheri Kiesecker and Leonie Haimson join me now to talk about it. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Leonie Haimson, let's talk first about what happened last year. This $100 million student data collection project funded by the Gates Foundation called inBloom, which was forced to shut down. A lot of people might not have heard about it. Tell us a little bit about the concerns raised by parents and other privacy advocates.
So I started hearing about this actually in 2012. I was tracking the creation of our state longitudinal database in New York State. And originally the contract was supposed to go to a company called Amplify, which was owned by Rupert Murdoch. And at the same time, Rupert Murdoch was involved in phone hacking scandals in Great Britain through the newspapers that he owns there. And so we started a campaign, as well as other advocates in the State Teachers Union, for the state controller to cancel this contract. It was a no-bid contract, and so he canceled it. And then a few months later, our state board of education, called the Board of Regents, approved a contract to essentially give all the data for the state's public school students and let our state database be created by what was then a project of the Gates Foundation called the Shared Learning Collaborative, with an operating system built by Wireless Generation, the very same company that the state controller had canceled. But because no money was changing hands initially, there was no access for the controller to come in and stop it. And we tried very hard to get information out, to find out, first of all, what data was being shared, and the state would tell us nothing. And then we tried to get information out to parents throughout New York State and the other 9 states and districts that were said to be participating in the project. And what was incredible is not a single parent or school board member or district superintendent that we knew of in the state of New York, and almost none in the rest of the country, had been told a single thing about this, including in Louisiana, which was participating. Their entire state board of education members had not been told anything about it. And so this entire project sort of moved with tremendous secrecy and swiftness, really because of the power and wealth of the Gates Foundation, which also incentivized many of these states and districts with offers of money to come into this project, and at the same time was going around the country incentivizing software developers to build their products around this data.
Wow.
And promising them access to it.
Wow.
We finally found out that in New York State and other states, they were planning on uploading the most incredibly sensitive data to this database, including student names, addresses, phone numbers, emails, grades, test scores, disabilities, and suspension records, race and economic status. And the contract, which we finally received, or the agreement with inBloom, what later became a separate corporation called inBloom, basically absolved inBloom from all responsibility if the data leaks out, either in storage or transmission. And so this huge, expensive project was going to gobble up all the student data and make it available to private companies without parental knowledge or consent. In New York State, the district superintendent didn't want any part of this and actually pulled out and said, we don't want our Race to the Top money, we'll return it. But then their student data was going to be uploaded anyway. So when we reached out to parents in other states, including Cheri in Colorado and many other parents across the country, this created a firestorm of interest. And one by one, every single state and district that had been committed to the inBloom project pulled out because of parent protests. Here in New York State, which was the first place where we organized and really the best organized of any of the states, our state commissioner refused to pull out, and we actually had to get a law passed by the legislature to block it, which is very difficult in New York because we have Democrats controlling the Assembly and Republicans controlling the Senate, but we did manage to pass that law. And our state commissioner, who was the worst in the country on student privacy, John King, is now the acting Secretary of Education in the U.S. In the Obama administration. So you can see we have a problem with the Obama administration in this way.
Now, Leonie Haimson is the co-chair of the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy, and she was just speaking. Cheri Kiesecker is a researcher, trained scientist for the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy as well. Cheri, what can you tell us about the typical type of information that a student's education record generally includes today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I will qualify that I'm now a retired scientist and fortunate enough to be a stay-at-home mom. But I did come in contact with the Student Privacy Coalition because I found out about what data was being given away in my child's student record. I think, first and foremost, there is a lack of transparency in what data is collected, and more than anything, my take-home message would be that we do need true transparency, and we need laws that very publicly, almost like food labels, if you will, tell parents what data is collected and how it's shared. And we need both laws at federal and state level to limit how the data is shared, and laws that would prohibit it being sold. And if you look at a student's education record, I think parents would be very concerned if they knew that the information in an education record, anything from your child's IEP, if you have a child with a disability, any mental health, medical health information within that record is not protected by HIPAA. So anything that is put into that record, including videos or photos, disciplinary actions, their developmental history, grades, but a lot of things that you probably wouldn't think would be shared are now able to be shared widely outside of school walls with federal and state agencies and also major corporations without parent consent or parent knowledge. And I think that there's a lot of movement within the ed tech industry, like the Bill Gates and the larger corporations who use this data for marketing purposes, and also with the federal government who is now linking the student data in every state's database. They take the student's information and upload it to into a state database called a State Longitudinal Data System, or SLDS. And each state has one of these SLDSs. They start in preschool, some states start in birth, and it's a longitudinal study profiling everything about this child, and it can now be shared.
Leonie, you write that in the article you both wrote together, the problem with student data collection began before the inBloom controversy. And you talk about in 2005, 10 organizations joined together, funded again by the Gates Foundation, to create the Data Quality Campaign. Tell us about that campaign and its objectives.
So way back when, the Gates Foundation had a real avid interest in maximizing the collection of student data at the state and federal level in order so that it can be used for many different purposes, including research and evaluation, but also to help outsource this data into private vendors' hands, because their ultimate goal is to create a system of quote-unquote personalized learning, but it's really mechanized learning in which instruction will be delivered via computers and software programs that are developed by vendors. And so they created, with millions of dollars, this organization called the Data Quality Campaign, which had as its primary mission to encourage the creation of state databases and multi-state databases that would track student data from essentially cradle to the grave, and also allow many different state agencies to share this data in one centralized database. So it's not just your kids' educational records that are being uploaded to these state databases, but also in some states, their health records from the health department, child services, criminal justice, juvenile justice, and many, many other state agencies. And all of this would have been illegal, except for the fact that FERPA, which is the federal law on privacy, student privacy, was revised twice, and ultimately by Arne Duncan during the Obama administration, to allow the accumulation and sharing of this data between state agencies at the state level, but also between states, because the federal government is barred by law from creating one unitary student database. The Gates Foundation and the federal government has been encouraging with grants and otherwise multi-state databases in which your kid will be tracked even if you move from one state to another. And so we talked about this one multi-state database that just got a big grant from the federal government called WICHE, for WICHE, the Western Interstate something or other. I know that Cheri must know what it stands for, Commission of something. And so that every state got money from the federal government through the stimulus funding to build these databases, and they've also gotten more and more grants since. So every state in the country is creating this database that's tracking your child from, preschool onwards. And what's really disturbing is that there seems to be no oversight over these databases, no transparency, wow, and no rules about who can get access. So we actually, when we filed the law against inBloom, New York State revealed that they were going to keep this database for every student for 8 years after they graduated from high school, and then put it in the state archive. So essentially, it could remain forever. And we have no idea who would get access and who wouldn't get access. And a lot of this information that they're collecting is very, very sensitive. Things like, has your child ever been arrested for anything? Have they had weapon charges, et cetera, et cetera? And in the criminal justice system, usually if it's a minor that's involved, the record is sealed and eventually destroyed if your child doesn't get into trouble again. But here, there's no sealing of records, and there's no necessity for the data ever to be destroyed. And we don't know who's getting access to it. So it's really a very, very dangerous trend.
Cheri, for those listening, parents with young children, not in school yet, as well as those who have children who've already been through the school system, what can they do learning about this, those who are concerned about data collection?
Well, parents should first ask their school and ask the school board what contracts they have both with vendors, because any online vendors collect massive amounts of data from children as well. So ask what is allowed in those data contracts, what data can be shared and collected. And then also ask the schools what is in their child's educational file and can they view that, because under FERPA you do have the right to view your child's educational record, and you can make corrections to it if you do find that there are inaccuracies. The third thing that I urge parents to do is ask your state legislature to please support legislation that would promote transparency on the data collection and also regulate the sale and collection of the data.
Yeah, really put pressure on the politicians.
Yeah, and every state should have an oversight board made from stakeholders who will, get access to information before the decision is made to collect this data and can provide substantive recommendations on how it can be protected. I think that that's critical. And just as Cheri said, you have the right to see your child's educational record at the school level. In FERPA, you also have the right to see whatever data the state has for your child. So we're really recommending also that parents reach out to their state education departments and demand to see this data. And by the way, state education departments are now asking for money in response, saying we're going to charge you a fee to access your child's data. And the U.S. Department of Education, though, has ruled that illegal. So they have no right to charge for this access. This is a decision made in the state of Nevada where they wanted to charge a father thousands of dollars to access his kid's data in the state database. So I think it's really important that parents also try to find out what data the state has on your child, whether there's any sort of oversight board, and if there's not, advocate very, very strongly for an oversight board to be created.
Well, I want to thank both of you for all your work and for coming on and talking to us about it. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you for having us. I really appreciate it.
Leonie Haimson is co-chair of the Parent Coalition for Student Privacy. Cheri Kiesecker is a researcher for Parent Coalition for Student Privacy. We're back in a few minutes.
This is the Michelangelo Signorelli Show.